Hello, I'm Susan Uthayakumar, Chief Energy and Sustainability Officer at Prologis. Today, we have the distinct honor of welcoming a guest who is a preeminent voice in the field of energy and environmental policy. Sir Dieter Helm is a professor of economic policy at the University of Oxford and a fellow in economics at New College, Oxford. He has advised governments and organizations around the world on a wide range of issues related to energy, environment, and infrastructure, and his insights have been instrumental in shaping policy discussion on sustainability and the transition to a lower carbon economy. In today's discussion, Sir Dieter will share his perspectives on the challenges and opportunities in the transition to a net zero economy and how companies like Prologis can contribute to this vital global effort. We are thrilled to have him here with us today, and I know his insights will be both thought-provoking and inspiring. Thank you for joining me today, Sir Dieter. I would love to kick things off by talking about your 2020 book, Net Zero: How We Stop Causing Climate Change. In the book, you explore the actions we need to take on different levels, from personal to global. What do you see as the big challenge that we face in accelerating the global energy transition, and what key actions do you think are essential to overcoming them?
The actions we need to take, what we need to do, and that's us as individuals, it's particular countries, and it's globally, start from a really brutal realism about how serious this problem is and how little has been achieved so far, because that's the base from working out what we really need to do. And the facts are pretty stark. We're still 80% dependent on fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. And every single year since the base year of 1990 for all these various agreements, we've added 2 parts per million of carbon to the atmosphere. And it's the concentration of carbon that is causing, with the other greenhouse gases, the greenhouse effect. So it's a balance of what goes in, our emissions, and what comes out. And once we recognize that more of the same is not going to solve the problem, that gets us to a realistic baseline, and we can then think about, well, what do we need to do? What are we prepared to do? And how urgently are we prepared to tackle these problems?
That's a great point you bring up, and it's a crucial part of the discussion. There needs to be a shift in the way we do business. What has made us successful in the past is not going to get us to where we need to go in the future. So with that in mind, what do we need to do differently? How do we balance the urgency of addressing these challenges with the need for continued economic growth?
We need to revisit what genuine economic growth is. And economic growth comes from new ideas, new technologies, new approaches to things. And my goodness, there are so many out there. Think of synthetic biology, modern genetics, think about quantum computing, think about AI. All these things are ways of adding to the human capacity going forward. But at the same time, we must make sure that we pay for the pollution we cause, and that we make sure that we pay to maintain our natural environment and indeed our other infrastructures, so the next generation gets a natural environment at least as good as ours. So we have to tackle the pollution and pay for it and pay for the maintenance. But yes, after that, we can expand our possibilities in a world in which there's just a cornucopia of new ideas, new technologies, which are coming thick and fast, and indeed faster than they've ever done in human history before.
I subscribe to the same thinking. The true economic growth should go hand in hand with sustainability fueled by innovation and new technologies. But to really make this work, we cannot ignore the role of our natural environment. That brings me to another key point you have made in the past. I want to go back to your book, Natural Capital: Valuing the Planet. You emphasize how crucial it is to integrate natural capital into our economic system. It is not just about preserving nature for its own sake, but recognizing that it is an essential part of our economy and our future. As we navigate the energy transition, how do you see the role of natural capital evolving? And what policies or framework do you think are needed to ensure that it is fully integrated into economic planning and the efforts to tackle climate change?
Well, the important thing about nature is that, and natural capital, of course, is that it is part of our economy. It's a crucial part of what makes our lives, our world possible. And therefore, to leave it out of the equation and to depreciate it and damage it is a massive own goal to humanity and to the prospects of us and our children. Now, when it comes to climate change, the natural environment absorbs a lot of carbon, particularly the oceans, but the rainforests, etc., soak up the carbon. And that's at least as important as the emissions. And the tragedy is that what we've been doing is destroying the ability of our natural world, our natural capital, to do that sequestration. So every time you see pictures of flames in the Amazon, or dams being built and helping to destroy the Mekong rainforest, or all those mines in the Congo, that is as important to climate change because it lowers our ability to have that natural world absorbing that carbon as it is to look at what comes out of power stations. So there is no balanced, equitable climate without a natural environment capable of soaking up an enormous amount of carbon.
Fascinating. Without preserving our natural capital, our efforts to reduce emissions are only half the battle. But this brings us to a bigger question about our current global efforts. Do you think the current global energy policies are enough to keep us aligned with the Paris Agreement goals, or do we need to make some adjustments to get back on track? And given the ongoing reliance on fossil fuels, are we on a trajectory that we can meet these targets, or do we need to rethink our approach?
Well, I would never say never, that it's impossible to achieve the Paris goals, but I think it's pretty much as unlikely as Elon Musk establishing a colony of people on Mars. It is really, really out of our grasp already. And that's not surprising because, we're still burning more and more fossil fuels every year. We haven't made any progress on that front. We are still damaging the ability of our world to sequestrate carbon. And the current pathway is just not doing a transition. There is no transition. And if we carry on like we're carrying on, it's not just the 1.5 degrees we're not going to achieve, it's the 2 degrees as well. That is currently out of our grasp on the current trajectory we're on. So what we would need to do is to revisit the foundations of what climate change policy is and focus on climate change not as a problem for England or Oxford or New York, but a problem for the globe. It doesn't matter where the emissions take place. It matters where the sequestration is damaged, rainforests and so on, if we really addressed the main causes of the growth of emissions going forward and the main causes of the destruction of natural capital. This would be altogether more sensible.
Amidst these challenges, I'm curious about where you see hope for the future. I would love to hear your thoughts on any innovation in energy technology or policy that you believe will be game changers in the next decade.
There is an enormous amount of technical change taking place. And we will have to have technical change to crack this problem. I know there are lots of people who think the existing technologies can do it. Well, possibly in theory, but not in practice. So if you look at what's coming, you have to have a context. So there is no shortage of energy whatsoever. 1 hour of sunshine is about equivalent to the year's total global consumption of electricity at the moment. The sun is the source of almost all of our energy. And it comes up every day. And it's a fusion nuclear reactor, that's what the sun is, and it keeps chucking off that energy. So no shortage. The question is how to harvest it, how to use it and transform it from the form it's in into a form we can use. So there are enormous developments potentially in solar that are critical to what happens going forward. But that's not just it. There are developments in how we can store power. There are developments about thinking about how to manage the storage of energy. And then there's nuclear power. And nuclear power is, of course, extremely controversial, but it's very hard to see how there's any baseload, really large scale, high density energy in a low carbon world without nuclear playing a significant part. And there the breakthroughs are coming thick and fast. So, out in front of us, it's that cornucopia again of new technologies that are out there, which AI will help us a great deal with. New materials will come along. So it's not that these things can't happen, but you can't expect any of them to come through in the next 10 years and transform our world in 10 years.
While it's clear innovation is key, it is not enough on its own. We also need significant engagement from the private sector to drive this transition forward. What role do you see large corporations like Prologis in leading the energy transition? How can we influence policy and set an example through sustainable practices?
Let me put it this way. If large companies don't engage, and if large companies don't deliver important parts of the transition, then it isn't going to happen. Okay, so it's absolutely essential that large businesses like your own play a significant part. And in this dimension, it's really important to realize that the companies are not distinct from us, the individuals and the consumers. And that's crucial for us, the population, us, the voters, to understand that we buy the stuff that big corporations provide for us. But it's also crucial for those big corporations to understand that they need to educate us and help us to make choices which are less polluting, because you know, for your assets and your activities, much more about the carbon pollution than anybody else does, because they're yours. They're there every day. And so I think shaping a serious story about how your company and other large companies transition away from where we are at the moment, taking their customers with them, is the crucial bit of this calculation.
Can you talk about the importance of energy security in this context, especially as we become more reliant on renewable energy sources? How do we balance the need for stable energy supply with the push for renewables?
So there's no question that energy security is the primary objective. And frankly, so it should be. Now, the problem with most of the renewables technologies, not all of them, but most of them, is that they're not secure. They're intermittent. You keep having these announcements saying, there's a new wind farm that's going to power, 50,000 homes. And they never say when the wind blows. And they never explain what the backup is or the alternative is to make sure that intermittent power is backed up by something else when, as simplistic one put it, the wind doesn't blow. Batteries don't do it enough yet. They have a big role to play. Active demand has a big role to play. But as yet, we still need baseload core power. And that's why if we just put all our eggs in the boxes of wind farms and solar panels in the current context, we're not going to get there. That's where baseload's required. In the medium term, that's probably nuclear. In the short term, it's almost certainly gas. God forbid that it's coal, but it's almost certainly gas. And that means we have to get very, very serious about CCS, carbon capture and storage, as part and parcel of the technology to enable that flexibility in the systems.
Ensuring energy security while transitioning to a renewable source is a complex challenge, especially when we consider the need for reliable, continuous power. This brings us to another important point, learning from the experience of different countries in managing this transition. Speaking of lessons, the UK has undergone significant energy market reforms over the years. Are there any key takeaways from the UK approach that would be valuable on a global scale? What can other countries learn from the UK's successes and mistakes in this area?
So there is one positive lesson from the UK, but for the most part, quite contrary to the public perception and the political rhetoric, the UK is a demonstration to many countries of how not to do it. You might think that's surprising since our headline emissions appear to have fallen very substantially. Well, they've fallen substantially in the main because we've got out of coal and moved from coal to gas. That's the big lesson in the UK. And that's a good thing. Stop focusing on the statistics that don't measure your real carbon footprint. Focus on the right numbers, and then you'll get a very different story. But whatever you do, get out of coal.
You highlighted some important lessons from the UK approach to energy reform, particularly the dangers of focusing on the wrong metrics and the importance of truly addressing carbon consumption. This brings us to a broader question of long-term planning. You mentioned earlier the risks of getting too caught up in short-term targets, but looking ahead, are there key milestones or priorities we should be aiming for by 2030 to ensure we're on the right path for a successful energy transition?
The problem about short-term targets, and we in the UK now have a target within essentially 5 years to achieve net zero in electricity, is that if you really mean it, you have to devote all your resources to achieving that short-term target. A better question is, what should we spend the next 5 years doing to help address global warming? Floating wind farms might help. That's one. The second one's the really big one, which is carbon capture and storage. We in the North Sea have lots of empty oil and gas wells, and we have pipes to them. If CCS doesn't work in the North Sea, it's not going to work anywhere globally. So regardless of how good it is for the British record on emissions and the British net zero targets, it will be a major contribution to the world for us to spend quite a lot of resources quite quickly on working out how much it's going to cost, how it's going to be done, and how it might be developed. It might all fail, but someone ought to try this, and that would be a much better gift to the world than some of the short-term policies that we're pursuing at the moment.
Focusing on the right long-term strategies is crucial, especially when it comes to major infrastructure projects like offshore wind and carbon capture. But as we think about the future, there's another big piece of the puzzle we need to consider: how the electrification of transport fits into the broader energy transition. Electric vehicles are becoming more widespread. How do you see their growth impacting the energy grid? And what changes would the energy sector need to make to ensure we maintain both reliability and efficiency as more and more EVs hit the road?
EVs and the electrification of transport is about the charging network. It's about the charging network. It's about the charging network. Oh, and then it's about the actual price of the cars and the batteries. Okay. So where you need to start is with the network for charging the vehicles. And in a number of countries, that is being done as a kind of competitive activity, a whole variety of companies coming in, deciding to do their own thing. They're not interchangeable very easily in terms of payment systems, etc. And of course, people pick off the cherries from the tree, i.e. the densely populated areas where people are richer and have got money to spend as early adopters of the technology. What you have to have is a network plan, charging network plan with the electricity distribution system and the electricity transmission system first, and you need to get on with that. And it's not surprising that one of the reasons why EV rollout is slowing all over the place is that people are very nervous about the ability to charge their cars. And they're right to be so, because actually, if you want to go anywhere more than local journeys, you really have to worry about whether you're going to literally stop. I have an EV. I have my own solar panels at home, and I use the EV for local journeys. But I would never use it to drive to Scotland. And that's because I have no visibility of the network being able to do the charging. And where I get to a charging point somewhere along the motorway, whatever, there'll be a huge queue because there aren't many charging points. It's just an obvious practical issue. And that means you have to invest ahead of the demand for EVs, not after the EVs turn up. And I don't think this is particularly difficult. And then the grid itself has to manage the demand, the battery storage that's in the cars, with smart demand management by consumers, by balancing that load against the different variable outputs from wind, etc. And there, smart demand, AI, the technologies for coordination become extremely important. And again, that needs an element of central planning.
Building a reliable charging network for electric vehicles is essential to their widespread adoption. But when we think about the future of electrification, it's just not about personal cars. Commercial fleets, especially trucks, present their own set of challenges. Let's dive into that. What do you see as the main economic and infrastructure barriers to electrifying fleet? And how do you think these challenges can be overcome?
When it comes to transport, there are different kinds of fleets. So if you're a company and you have a fleet of cars, that is a real opportunity to develop your own charging networks, to link up with contracts and developments of, solar energy, wind energy, et cetera, et cetera. Large companies usually have very large roof spaces, for example, at their place of work. That's ideal for solar panels where you're almost have got a few meters or a few yards to go to the actual point you charge the car. And that enables larger scale batteries to be introduced to do storage on site. So that's a great opportunity. When it comes to light vans, delivery vans and so on, many of the same things apply. And in addition, you can manage a fleet by essentially having extra vehicles. So in comes one light van that's run down its battery. You park that up and drive straight out with another one that's been charged in the meantime. I've always been actually taken by the idea that we might even move to a situation where a vehicle drives into a depot, and out goes the battery in the car, in goes another one, and it's like a pit stop in Formula One or car racing. You just go in and out, and then the battery is taken off and charged when and as it's most efficient. Large trucks are a completely different order of magnitude, and that's where it's still not clear whether hydrogen is going to be part of that system or whether it's really going to be possible to do that with large-scale batteries. And that large-scale trucking network is not just about deliveries and collections of physical goods and services. It's crucially in our world about the movement of refrigeration. Our entire food system depends upon refrigeration, refrigerated lorries, refrigerated ships. Otherwise, our system in the world will break down. Just have to think what you eat every day to work out where it came from and how that food was stored. That again, at least on the shipping side, hydrogen looks a big part of that story yet. We haven't cracked that, but that's no excuse for not cracking the cars end and the light vehicles. And there I say, businesses with depots, with roofs, etc. I mean, this is just a wide open goal to go for. And customers, I'm sure, will appreciate that that's what the company is doing in order to do its bit to make sure that the stuff I buy from that company or the services I buy are as low carbon as they possibly can be.
All right, so we're trending toward the end of our conversation, and I want to make sure we end on an optimistic note. What gives you the most hope and optimism as you look beyond 2030 with the energy transition? And beyond that, what advice would you give those in the industry who are striving to make a meaningful impact?
The optimism, I prefer the word realism, but if you want to use the word optimism, comes from the obvious fact this is a perfectly solvable problem. Okay, it's not rocket science to solve climate change. It's about the coordination of policies which, on the one hand, reduce emissions, and on the other, protect our natural assets and our natural environment so that it can carry on doing the sequestration. On the natural environment side, almost anything you could think of, which is positive from a climate change point of view, is positive from a biodiversity point of view and positive for economic growth. It's a great thing to turn our mind to. We should stop exterminating half the creatures on this planet or the species on this planet, turn that around because it's in our interest to do so. On the climate change front, just have a look round at any university or any area with a venture capital base. There's so many startups. There are so many new ideas. There's so many bright young minds who've turned their attention to what is the challenge of their lifetime. I see it in my own university. I see it across the world. And I see startup companies with one idea after another. Now, of course, most will fail. That's not the point. Some will succeed. So I have no doubt that we can solve our energy problems. I have no doubt that we have got more energy than we could possibly ever use available to us. There's no shortage of that energy. What there is bridging that gap between the technologies we have today and what we're going to need to make that transition. That makes me optimistic. Less optimistic I am that voters and democracies, not alone the autocratic and dictatorial states around the world, are prepared to confront us, the ultimate consumers, with the cost of doing that. Because the frank position we're in is we're all living beyond our environmental means. I don't know anyone who thinks other than that. Well, then we need to get within our environmental means. And that means it is a hard truth that we're going to have to pay for the pollution we cause, and that's going to cost us. What it takes is bold, brave politicians and great business leaders to tell us that fundamental truth. Instead of telling us a fairy tale that, you know what, you can have this transition, it's all going to be easy, it's going to be cheap. In fact, you're going to pay less than you're currently paying now. It's all a great big GDP growth opportunity. It's more complicated than that. And I have faith in humans to believe that if you tell them the truth, rather than a, what I call happy clappy story about climate change, you get a much better response. People aren't stupid. They can see that what we're doing at the moment isn't working, and they have to be given the pathway to do it properly.
And before we say goodbye, tell us about your latest book.
I've been working on climate change and natural capital. I see the two together for the last decade or so. And when I wrote my book on net zero, which is now 4 years ago or so, I was keen to point out that what we were doing was not going to crack the problem. We had to get real about the problem, understand the nature of the problem, and work out how to take these things forward. And a few things have changed since then, but I stand by that. What I went on to do was to describe in my most recent book, in Legacy, what a sustainable economy would actually look like. Not whether we were going to do it, but if we wanted to live within our environmental means, if we wanted to pursue sustainable economic growth, what would we actually have to do for an economy to achieve those outcomes? And that's Legacy. What I'm now doing, and that's at least a year off, I think, is working out what happens if we don't. And that's very sobering. But it's not that we don't have the scope to address these questions. It's not that it's very hard to define what a sustainable economy is. In Legacy, I just set that out. It's just that confronts us with many of the issues which, in our everyday world, are so obvious to us. More debt doesn't solve anything very much, right? Borrowing from the kids, living well while the younger generation has less opportunity. This isn't right. And part of what we're doing is not looking after our climate and our biodiversity and nature in order to make sure that the kids have at least as good as a set of natural capital, climate, and broader infrastructures as we had. And my generation has let them down. And my book sets out, well, what would we have to do if we wanted to look the next generation in the eye and say, we've done the right thing by you. We've made sure you have the opportunities to choose how to live your life in the way that I and my generation have been blessed with in the past. So that's what Legacy is about. And it sets out the framework from everything from what the macroeconomics looks like to how you should do the accounting for the natural environment, right through to how the core infrastructure, energy, and so on should be regulated to produce that kind of outcome.
Thank you, Sir Dieter, for sharing your insights with us today. Your perspectives on the path to a net zero economy have truly highlighted the crucial role that all sectors, including ours, must play in addressing the challenge of climate change. I will be continuing the conversation on the energy transition on October 2nd at Groundbreakers, where I will be moderating a discussion on how decarbonization goals are driving logistics forward with a fully integrated, interconnected, and digitized energy market. I'm excited to have an incredible line of panelists, including Jean-Pascal Chakwa from Schneider Electric, Toby Frenzy from Granular Energy, and Amund Wick, former State Secretary of the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum Energy, to join me at Groundbreakers. Please visit groundbreakers.prologis.com to register.